Michael ends racist progressive heroes. Let's see.
So I've got 3 suggestions for who we ought to topple.
This is like the PragerU guy. This guy is the definition of a non-player character. He is like just not a human being. He just like says whatever the script put in front of him tells him to say.
First one, Karl Marx, on the Jewish question. Here's just a little quote from that tract.
This is a very funny thing. Are you guys ready to talk about the Jewish question? So in the 19th century, there was this sort of intellectual movement that a lot of like educated bourgeois Jews as well as non-Jews were participating in. Like the question of whether Jews could ever truly be, for example, like Germans or French or English or Spanish or Italian, etc., etc. Like whether they could really be of their nationality, of the country that they were from, or if they were always just Jews first. And it was like sort of a serious sort of debate going on that a lot of Jews took very seriously and didn't really see it in terms of like it being oppressive or whatever, even though it obviously is, even though it obviously is abhorrent by today's standards. And that's the context in which Marx wrote his work on the Jewish question, right? Marx was himself an ethnic Jew, and he was asking the question of, so can Jews ever be like everyone else within these nations or not? And there were some Jews who were like, yes, yeah, we can, and we're going to do everything we possibly can to show you, right? So they were like, some of them renounced basically their religion entirely or their ethnicity entirely, just because to like prove themselves to be loyal to their countries. Others were like, we don't need to not be Jewish to be French or German or whatever. We can be both just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There were others on both sides, Jews and anti-Semites, who had the idea that like, no, Jews cannot ever be like French or German truly, that like they need to leave and go make their own country somewhere. And it's that is actually the current through which like the Zionism as like an intellectual movement began. It was an initiative of Jews, of bourgeois intellectual Jews who are participating in this sort of public scholarly debate, and they basically reached the conclusion, or at least they pragmatically came to the conclusion that it would just be better for us to go and make our own country somewhere. So that's like what the whole Jewish question thing is about in the context of Marx's work on it. And Marx's conclusion in his work on the Jewish question was that Jewish emancipation is not like, it's not one of integrating them into the citizenship of a state. It's of liberating them in the same way that everyone else should be liberated, like in terms of like liberating Jews from like the sort of opium of the people, like the religion, and the idea that there's any difference between them and other people as well. The idea that like basically like liberating them as workers. So it was sort of like, in a way, like I guess you could say it was like sort of class reductionist in a way, but not really. It's just like very mischaracterized because, the term Jewish question nowadays is taken far out of the original context, where it was like a public sort of debate thing that Marx was participating in as an ethnic Jew himself, rather than like, the whole white nationalist dog whistle thing where they say, JQ. So let's watch what Michael Knowles has to say about it now that we have the context.
What is the secular basis of Judaism? Practical needs, self-interest. What is the worldly religion of the Jew? Huckstering. What is his worldly god? Money. Very well then, emancipation from huckstering and money, consequently from practical, real Judaism, would be the self-emancipation of our time, an organization of society which would abolish the preconditions for huckstering, and therefore the possibility of huckstering would make the Jew impossible. That sounds politically incorrect to me.
See, if you actually take this in its context, yeah, it sounds terrible, right? It absolutely is terrible as well. But the way that Marx is talking here, he's talking about the fact that at least in like Western Europe, definitely not so much Eastern Europe, but in Western Europe, a lot of the Jews there were, sort of upper class people, and this was absolutely nothing to do with them being Jews, nothing to do with Jewish stereotypes, but because basically for generations Jews were forced into these sorts of occupations like banking, etc., because they were excluded from basically everything else. So even though they were disadvantaged in this way, they still came to succeed quite often in these sorts of like financial spheres, etc., etc. So what Marx is saying here is basically, in a really sort of anti-Semitic sort of way, that like emancipating Jews is essentially a matter of class, right? Like emancipating Jews is emancipating them from class conflict, a consequence of like the professions that they had been forced into by centuries and centuries of oppression and centuries of laws that were specifically directed at excluding them from certain professions. So like there's certainly parts of Marx's manuscript there that are absolutely anti-Semitic, but you have to take them in the context of the fact that Marx himself was Jewish, and that like he wasn't saying it in a way that like he was saying like, you know, Jews are naturally like this. He was saying it in like a lot of Jews are bourgeoisie. In his time, a lot of Jews were, at least in the west of Europe, a lot of them were disproportionately rich. And you know, for him, this is not so much because they are Jews; it's because of the class relation. And his conclusion in this work was that Jewish emancipation is not something you can just so simply do by accepting Jews as a legitimate part of a nation, by like essentially abolishing class. And that's also, you know, the Jewish question in the 19th century was also the context through which Zionism. There was like this debate, especially among Jews themselves. Like there was the crux of the debate where they were like non-Jews who were like, yeah, Jews can become French or whatever while still being Jews. Some of them also said, oh, you know, they can become French, but they need to stop being Jews. Or no, they can never be French, for example. And then there were also some Jews themselves who held those same opinions in some way. And the ones who like felt that like one that Jewishness itself was sort of a nationality, sort of like something that would supersede the other nationalities, they thought that like it would be best if Jews went and made their own state somewhere. And that was like kind of how Zionism was born, but there was also an element of practicality to it. Like some people didn't really think that, but they just thought that like the prejudices of others meant that like, you know, it would just be safer if they went and made their own state. And a lot of the Jews who stayed in Western Europe and Eastern Europe also, like a lot of those like intellectual upper class Jews who decided like, you know, I'm going to prove to my nation that I can be loyal. I'm going to prove that I'm a Frenchman. I'm going to do everything I possibly can to show these people that Jews can, you know, we can be real citizens of our nation. A lot of them died in the Holocaust later on, or their descendants died in the Holocaust later on. So in a way, there was like this idea that like, especially after the Holocaust, that like the ones who thought that, or like, you know, at least that it was safer for Jews to leave Europe was kind of validated by that. And I mean, there's certainly an element of truth to that, especially in the context of the 19th century, early 20th century, as incredibly obvious as it possibly can be. You know, the problem with the formation of Israel was not so much that Jews wanted their own state, because at the end of World War II, it was completely understandable that Jews would want their own state. It's that they displaced another people in order to do it. And that is the inherent problem with the formation of Israel.